All right, everybody, what the hell is going on? I got Stephanie Edmonds here with me from Teaching Liberty. This has been something I've been kind of excited to talk about for a little bit. She's fighting the vaccine mandates and is a public school teacher, if I got that correct, all right?
Yes. Currently
Okay.
former, maybe still am, gonna be fired tomorrow, somewhere in there. A teacher of the city of New York. I was tenured actually the year like everything shut down 2020. I'd gotten my tenure as a social studies teacher, and I taught mainly 10th grade global history, but I taught some US, some government, and I also did some reading, which like draws on my background from before I was a high school teacher. I taught like phonics and math instruction.
Okay, cool. So for you, where were you at prior to 2020? Because I breezed through your channel as much as I could, and it seems like you're pretty on the point is with most libertarian leaning kind of people. Would you describe yourself as a libertarian, or was there kind of like a moment where you felt like this was more correct than what you were previously or than what you previously understood?
No, I would say like I'm a little L libertarian.
Hmm.
Though I have voted Libertarian Party for the last three elections, Gary Johnson twice, and then it was what's her name?
That
This
should tell
time
you all you need about her.
Jo Jorgensen, that's
Yeah,
her name. There we
I
go.
voted and I donated to her too. So
Okay,
that's
I
all.
didn't donate to her. You know who I donated to was Tulsi Gabbard. I'm sorry, we have a guest. This is my son who's saying that I'm too loud,
Oh, well, he's
which really
adorable.
means
That's
he just
fine.
wants to make a guest appearance.
Yeah, no, you're
Go
perfectly
ahead.
fine.
Go ahead.
My dogs are my most frequent guests, so don't feel bad at all.
Listen, I kids and dogs, listen, I think kids are better to have than dogs because if it's a rainy day, I can say, you know what? We're not going outside today. But if you have that dog, you got to go outside for a walk. I guess unless you have a big space and they'll go out and come back. But
Yeah, no, my dogs definitely don't like going outside in the rain. If I let my pit bull out, she'll just kind of turn around and stare at me, like,
okay, okay.
hey, yeah, we're not doing this.
So you got me there. You got me there.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I would say I've always been kind of like asked a lot of questions about politics just very naturally. And for a while, I was kind of like socialist. You know, when you're young, you're like, well, everybody should just be equal, right? Like you have a very simplistic kind of understanding of how the
Very
world works.
idealistic.
Yeah, and that's how it's supposed to be. You know, you're a teenager, like, you're supposed to hate the world and love the world and think everything should be equal and all that. And then my dad's kind of like, nah, no, you know. And of course, so we fight about these things, as all good Jewish families do at the dinner table, have very intense discussions and fights even to this day.
Mhm.
And I ended up going to Israel and traveling, and I stayed on a few different kibbutz, which originally were formed in the socialist tradition, right? So these are like these little communities that are actually one of the ways that Israel was able to be founded, because they like were all up and down that strip, and then they were able to kind of like unite and fortify. Um, whatever side of the issue you stand on, that's just facts.
Mhm.
So the yeah, I went out there. They all had to change over to a capitalist model. So I kind of learned that, but also like, I was going 19 on 20, getting to see the world. And I came back and I was going to Yukon, and they had a libertarian club. So I joined the libertarian club with like a bunch of weird dudes. I was the only girl.
There, there was no waiting line outside the women's bathroom in that club.
And then like I took over because most of them were like in their senior year. So I was in there one year, and then the next year they were all like seniors. So I took over and I changed it to the alternative political society so that we could like open up and try to attract more membership. But yeah, that's kind of like my political journey to where I am today. One thing I do like to say that is both kind of me being like I'm bragging, and also a clear kind of pointer of what my political direction has been is 2008. I was 18 years old. That would have been my first time eligible to vote. Obama was running. we all know hopes and dreams and all
Change.
that and change, and I'm like, I don't know, like I'm not really into this Republican guy over here who, what was it? It was
Mitt Romney or John
Mitt Rom
McCain. I
yeah,
think it was John
McCain.
McCain. Yeah.
McCain the first time around. I'm not really into him. Like he's all about war and like I don't like war. And then I just don't believe this guy. Something about it is like he can speak well, he's got swag, but it just seemed a little phony to me. It seemed contrived, but in a way, again, I'm still quite young. I couldn't articulate, but I ended up not voting for anyone because that had predated my discovery of the Libertarian Party. It wasn't until the next year that I really started to go into this alternative political world and really be able to articulate why I just didn't buy any of it.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah. That I don't think a lot of people had that kind of foresight, because I think a lot of people genuinely felt that Obama would have been a change. And then, obviously, as we saw, that was the complete, no, I shouldn't say the complete opposite, but it was more of the same, because,
Yeah,
we got more drone strikes, more wars,
right.
and, consequentially, all the stuff that we have kind of going on today. So, kind of tailing on there to your story, in 2020, I'm sure we can all remember what feels like 10 years ago in February of 2020. What was life like for you? Real quick, we had shows scheduled. There's actually a flyer right there of a show that my band never played. And I remember I was pretty excited for it. And the last show that we played was at the Rail House here in Pennsylvania, and it was a packed show. I mean, wall to wall,
All
front to
right.
back.
What kind of
Yeah,
music is it?
we're like alternative metal,
Okay.
right? So I don't really know where to put us, but we're like not insanely heavy, but we're not like AC/DC, right?
Okay.
So I think we have something to offer everybody, but that's neither here nor there. We kind of play a little bit of like
Well, you're
punkish
not
kind of
too
stuff
far
too.
from me, like,
Oh yeah,
so.
well, we play bigger shows all the time. We opened for Steel Panther actually in 2020. But so yeah, we played that show super packed, and then we're like, yeah, man, like this is gonna be an awesome year. We just released our first EP. This is gonna be awesome. We got all these shows scheduled all over the country. And then next thing you know, oh,
Boom.
okay. Yeah, March rolls around and then
Yep.
we're all locked in our homes. So what was February going into March like, and what was kind of like the experience, and specifically for you because you were in you live in Connecticut but you work in New York?
In New York City, yeah. So I live like in suburbs of New York City, but even though I'm, across the state line, so I cross the state border every day.
Mhm.
Um, and so I would have been making that commute, 5 days a week, drop my son off at his preschool, go into the Bronx, park up my car, go into my class, teach my day, come back, pick him up, and just the regular kind of 9 to 5 sort of life, you can say.
Mhm.
Um, and thinking about how am I going to have my trajectory, because that was my tenure year. That was my tenure year, right? So I'm like thinking about tenure
Mhm.
and thinking about, okay, well, what do I want to do? I definitely saw myself becoming an administrator, like principal one day, but I also wanted to like make sure I was a really good teacher, because I don't want to be one of those administrators where like, wait, how many years did you spend in the classroom?
Mhm.
Because on the one hand, I do think that there's people who are natural leaders and probably can go through the ranks quickly, but at the same time, there's nothing that replaces that on the ground experience,
Mhm.
right? So
Absolutely.
so I was like, I want to put in whatever certain number of years, and I felt like I still had more time in the classroom. Um, and yeah, I was that was really like building up my YouTube channel and my Instagram, because I had just gotten on, like, I think in that summer, like summer 2019, I I really started everything up.
Mhm.
Because I was just like, I was a big YouTube person. Like I watched a lot of YouTube, and I was like, I can do this.
Yeah.
Like there's not enough females in here. Like there's some, but I was
Mhm.
like, I can do this. Like I talk about this stuff all the time. Like, why don't I just do it into the camera? And then at the same time, I was sort of like, I know like teachers, politics, how is this gonna go? But I don't know. I'm always willing to kind of ride that line, I guess.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that's where I was in 2019, building up my YouTube, my social media stuff, and just like doing the teacher thing and the mom thing.
Yeah. So then February into March, how dramatic was that change for you? Because for me, I'm a mechanic, right? I work on cars for a living. Cars break no matter what, right? So I'm like, oh, well, I'm not going to get laid off. Nothing's going to change. I got laid off. First
Right,
time in
because
my entire
nobody's
life.
driving.
Right. So they kind of set up our work schedule a little messed up, and then they just ended up laying me off for about like 3 or 4 weeks. But then obviously I went back to work. But so what was the change like for you? Because public schools got shut down, and then you were teaching over Zoom. I believe they had kids doing and kind
Yeah.
of all that. How was that for you?
All right. So here's the thing is that I was early on it, right?
Mhm.
So I wasn't as early as some people because my son had his birthday party on March 10th. We had his birthday party. And there was a family or two that canceled from going to the party. And I was
Yeah.
like, what are they? But then I started like paying a little bit more attention and seeing things. And then by the next week, I was sort of like, guys, I don't know, there's something going on here. And I took Friday off of work and I put a post on my Instagram page for my students. And I don't usually like do stuff. I was like, I'm taking today off because I think there's something going on with this coronavirus thing. And, I think that that's what I'm doing. So I just like made it clear that's what I was doing. And then come Sunday, everything shut down. Right. So I was early on things.
Mhm.
And I was early too, like, oh, on the masks and all these things that people were like, you're going to wear masks, you're going to do that. And then after like the 2 weeks or so, I was sort of like, all right, well, they said spring break. So let's see what's happening by spring break. So that would have been a little bit over a month. And then they said, oh, we're going to extend it past spring break. And I was like, what? Because I had looked at the data and I remember on April 13th, I made a post on my student Instagram with a glass of like a green smoothie and a packet of my vitamins. Like it's like one of those packets, like those smelly vitamins, like the real good ones. And I was like, one of the best things that you can do is just make sure that you're, getting your fruits and vegetables and your vitamins. Because I had looked at the data and it was very clear who was dying. It was very clear the trends at that time I could tell.
Right.
And so that's right around where I was sort of like, you know what? Like, I think there's something else going on here. And like, I do think I was wrong for calling for the government basically to shut things down for 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Like I said to do that. And I was wrong because I was very scared at the beginning. But
Right.
after those 2 weeks, I was sort of like, all right, what's going on?
Hmm. Yeah, it was clearly, as I've called it now, kind of the gift that keeps on giving. And I've gone out and criticized Trump probably more than anybody, but I can understand the state of emergency initially. I don't agree with it. I can understand lockdowns initially. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. But then after the first kind of 2 weeks, and once you kind of learn your district or whatever locale you're in, then it's like, okay, well, this was a big mistake. We need to course correct. We need to find ways to protect the elderly, the obese, and people who are more vulnerable to this, and inform people of what their risk profiles are, and also give people the
Right.
knowledge to know how to improve their health. So that way, if they do get sick with this, their immune system's as resilient as it can be. So that way we have less death on our hands. But there was none of that. It was just, oh,
Right.
well, stay in your home and you're going to die if you
Right.
catch this airborne
Yes.
disease. And oh yeah, it lives on surfaces for 2 weeks.
Yes. Wiping things
Yeah.
down, like all that stuff. It was like,
Mhm.
yeah. And I just remember after that, we just like spent a lot of time outside. At some point, I just kind of like at first I was working really hard when I with my students. But then it's like students kind of stopped coming and like I would reach out and you try. Um, but I also had my son at home. Like his
Mhm.
daycare wasn't open. So things were, they went up and down. I'm sure like everybody, like we had some really good days, like where everything was fine and we played outside a lot and I wasn't
Yeah.
stressing about work and stuff. And then there was days like when I was stressing about work and trying to get things done and my son was bothering me and whatever, like, um, and like doom scrolling. and like not on a good schedule. You know, I was like pretty messed up for a long time. And then once I just got a little bit of routine back, like in the fall when school opened up, you know,
Mhm.
but like I was going into work every day again. Like I was like, okay, I feel good again.
Right. Yeah, it was
Even
kind of.
though the world sucked and I was so mad about the schools like the way they were, but I had structure.
Mhm. Yeah, it was a really odd feeling for me to go back to work. And I remember sending my fiance a picture. I had a hat on and this goofy looking mask. I was like, I hate this. This is so stupid. And, I'm pretty sure they have a rule at my old job. I don't work there anymore, but that if you're not vaccinated, you have to wear a mask. And it felt so
Oh,
silly kind of from the outset. And there was a status I posted literally I want to say it was like March 15th of 2020. And I said, I'm not scared of coronavirus. And
okay.
I look back at that and I'm like, I got this one
I
right.
was right.
Everyone else, and including Republican coworkers. I mean, these guys are supposed to be dying the wool Trump supporters and brave and fighting the system, but they're like cowering. And then even like
Right.
years afterwards, they were still like, oh well, I got vaccinated, and you should stay home if you're sick and don't come near me.
Right.
They were
I
looking
mean,
at me.
like if you're like
Yeah,
super sick, like you should
yeah,
probably stay home. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
but at the
within
same time,
reason.
yeah, but at the same time, it's like, I'm sorry, like if my son has like the sniffles for a week, like I'm not gonna keep him home for a week. Like that's
Yeah,
ridiculous. Like you go do things when you have the sniffles, like you go
right.
do things when you have a little cough. Like that's life. And so yeah, in terms of the thing that I was looking back on it the other day, July 2020, there was a segment on MSNBC where they had like 5 or 6 doctors on there, and they're like, if it were up to you, would you open schools? And they were all like 100% yes. If it were my kids, yes. Like I'm sending my kids back. And they were all like, yes, yes, yes. And then like right after that, Donald Trump was like, oh, schools should open. And everyone's
Mm.
like, the schools can't open. You want the teachers to die.
Yeah,
And then like I made a couple videos at that point being like and reacting to some teachers and just being like, I think that we should open schools. And like I remember being like, well, I don't want to be like too brazen, like calling for things, but I also like thinks that the school should open.
yeah.
I had been like I went to a bunch of parties over the summer. Like I hadn't worn my mask at all over the summer. I don't
Hmm.
think I maybe yeah, because they had dropped mask mandates in the summer. I knew I was gonna have to wear them to go back to work. And I was like slightly nervous maybe going back to work, but I feel like it was more trauma than it was like me actually being scared. And then like once you're there for a couple weeks, you're just sort of like, and you realize that it's just like the masks are so stupid because you're like right next to the kids and like all this stuff. Like, and I never enforced the masks. And like the kids knew that they could come into my room because there were some teachers, like I was in their room sometimes when they would like pull your mask up. And I was like, I would be like, whoa, like, okay, that's crazy, Like I never there was like maybe one time there was like if I seen like the admin maybe like walking down the hall, I'd be like, oh hey guys, like the principal's coming, just like for me. And then like whatever. But that almost signals like I don't care, but I also like don't want to get that text message being like, you know?
Yeah, well, you just want the idea of masking children was so silly to me from the outset and pretty early on, because if you understood this disease early on, is that you understand that it mostly affects elderly and obese people, right? And
Right.
the way that it kind of moves throughout a population is through viral
And
load.
mostly elderly people who are obese
Right,
at
right.
that.
So um, children don't get very sick, right? So they don't generate a high viral load. Well, if you don't have a high viral load, then you can't spread it. You can't shed a viral particle if you don't have a high viral load.
I do believe that there are some studies that suggest that children are much less likely to spread it. I don't know if it was directly
Mhm.
linked to viral load or just the way that because I think like kids have less ability to like project or something, but I don't know.
Mhm.
I might challenge them on that one
Yeah.
myself.
Right.
So I don't know what the exact like mechanism was,
Mhm.
but yeah, it definitely seems like kids, whatever for whatever reason, are able to handle the disease and less likely to spread it. I saw like a lot of the studies because I was looking a lot specifically at the education and the schools data. And so they would do studies where they would trace like how the virus would spread in the schools. And it almost always was either teacher to teacher or teacher to student. It almost
Mhm.
never was student to teacher.
Right. Well, and that was the most sinister part, is that we're basically sacrificing the young for the old, which we would never do. And the other thing is, you never ask the elderly if this is what they wanted, because
Well, they left them alone to die in
right,
nursing homes. And some people did not die necessarily of COVID. They died of despair sometimes. Or people spent so long in the hospital, not able to see their family. And then they come out of the hospital and then they died right after that. There
right.
was this one woman who I know her through Twitter. And she's like one of these open schools moms. And her mom was in Canada and she got admitted to the hospital twice, but it was never quote unquote life threatening. So they weren't allowed to go see her. And then right when she got out and they were going to go see her, she died.
That's, I almost don't have words for how vile I think that is, that literal families were separated in the same country. You weren't allowed to go see your grandparents, your father, when you got to think this is probably all that they could possibly want. I don't think most elderly really cared about getting COVID, so long as they got to kind of live out their final days,
Yeah.
seeing their
I don't
children and
know. I think
grandchildren.
some elderly like did really get super scared. Right,
Mhm.
because they scared them a lot too. And like, what do old
Well,
people
yeah,
do
yeah,
all day?
right.
Like they sit around and they watch news. But they're for sure like people who like weren't super scared. Like,
Mhm.
my mom was like somewhat cautious, but she also like almost never stopped seeing us, unless somebody
Right.
like wasn't feeling well or something, like she was there. And then even when I didn't feel
Yeah.
well, like she would take my son for me. Like I remember there was a couple
Yeah.
days where I wasn't feeling well. I don't think I had COVID. I just don't think I felt well for a couple days.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, or like when one of them, so there's definitely people out there like who are grandparents who do what grandparents supposed to do. They be there
Yeah.
for you no matter what.
Exactly. Well, yeah, that's kind of my point, is that, obviously everybody knew if you're sick, probably a good idea not to go around the people who are most vulnerable. But like, I think if they're dying with COVID, they're probably, they probably want to see their loved
Yeah.
ones. It's so sick that people who weren't sick weren't allowed to go see their grandparents who were dying in hospitals.
And now
It's
a lot of those
so
hospitals
vile.
have
Yeah.
vaccine mandates.
Hmm. Right. So it's so ridiculous. And initially I was pretty, I don't want to say pro vaccine, but I was like, okay, well, maybe this is a good thing. I obviously didn't take it. I got COVID and
Yeah.
it was
Oh,
like
I
nothing.
encouraged people to get it because I was like, get
Right.
your vaccine and get your butt back to work.
Mhm.
And it's so funny because there's these like teachers who troll me on Twitter and they have that tweet screenshotted and then they'll post it up anytime I like say something that's like kind of critical. They'll be like, what about this? And I'll be like, I wasn't saying that I wanted it or it should be mandated. I was
Mhm.
encouraging this teacher to take it so that they could go back to work because I cared about the
Right.
schools being opened. And, I was just, I guess, crossing my fingers that they didn't mandate it. I don't think
R-
me promoting it had anything to do with the mandate.
Right. I think that's kind of where I was too, is like, hey, if you didn't get COVID and you're looking for something to just kind of bolster your immune system, this looks viable. So maybe you should consider getting
Right.
it. Right.
So my
And we didn't have
position
any
is
data
like,
yet.
you have to choose,
Right.
right? You can't be scared of both the vaccine and COVID. You have to choose. You have to either choose to get it or to brave it out in the world.
Yeah.
So that was sort of my position, even though if like one of my, like, for example, when my parents said they were going to get it, I was like, I don't really think you should. Obviously, I think everybody should have their choice, but I don't think you should, even
Mhm.
though they say you're older and at risk. I don't know. Like, you guys are pretty healthy, and like, who knows what this thing could do, and da da da.
Right. Yeah. I tend to revolt against binary extremes, because I've seen so many people say that, like, if you so much as smell the vaccine, you're gonna die. And it's like,
Oh, that's a little crazy, I
right,
think.
right. But
Or like be around people with the
right.
vaccine, you know what I mean?
I'm
Like,
being a
I've
little
never.
hyperbolic, but the same deal with like COVID. People are so ridiculous about COVID. It's like, okay, well, yes, younger people seem to be harmed more by the vaccine than by COVID. I think we can safely say that by now. Older people seem to get the vaccine to be relatively fine, and it seems like it may
Maybe,
provide.
maybe. I just think that they're just like, the thing is that it's just so hard to tell, right?
Exactly, right.
Because how do you connect one thing to another, especially because it seems like, okay, in the acute form, it seems to cause like some myocarditis or heart attacks,
Right.
right?
Well,
Or
especially
blood
in younger
clots.
people. Right. In
Yeah.
younger people.
But in the not acute form, right?
Mhm.
It seems to cause a wide variety of other ailments or push along other things like cancers
Mm.
or other ailments that you might autoimmune things. I don't know.
Yeah. It's
I haven't looked too hard at that data, but just like from people who I've been following and have been like right on things, that seems to be the suggestion at least.
right. Yeah. And obviously, I would never encourage, a mandate or anything like that. I've spoken out against that plenty. But it's like I said, I just don't like the binary extremes I hear so many people going to, but I'm not going to sit here and simp for it because initially I was kind of like, okay, well, if this is something for older, obese people, okay. But now I'm kind of like, well, you guys should probably like, it's not
Listen,
looking good
as if
anymore.
I'd be cool with it if they're like, hey, do you want to take this experimental shot? You know what I mean? Like if they
Right.
called it
Just
what
be
it was,
honest.
like
Yeah.
be honest, like if you walk up to a drug dealer and you're buying X, you're not like, can you tell me the formula that this is made with? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you have no idea what's in that shit. It's just like whatever was in the load or what
Yeah.
that
It
day.
was just like a legitimized drug deal,
Yeah,
essentially.
like you know what I mean? Like that's what I literally like sometimes when I'm like drinking a little too much and I think about it, I'm just like, bro, like, is that really what we're doing? Like, we're mandating you take the drug from the sketchy ass drug dealer? Like, isn't that what our parents told us not to do all our lives? And I
It's
was
a
like, are you
sketchy ass
sure,
drug
mom?
dealer. Yeah, he's wearing a lab coat, so he's got to be official, right? Doesn't matter if he just pulled it out of the alleyway, out of a dumpster or something like that. He's wearing a lab coat. You could trust him. That's what all the smart people wear, right? The
But
adults are in charge, so we're all good now. Um, so kind of tagging on here, um, you're fighting the law in New York against said vaccine mandates. Kind of fill me in on what's going on there and how's it going?
oh, it's going and going and going. New York City is a very special place, probably not too dissimilar, maybe from some places in California or like DC, maybe Portland, super, super deep blue places. Um, so currently, there is no more vaccine passport across the city, which was trademarked the key to NYC. So that is no longer in existence. However, the employer mandate, the private employer mandate, and the city employer mandate are still in place. So technically, every single worker, regardless if they work for a private company or for the city, need to be vaccinated. Now, if you work for the state, like the MTA, right? Because the MTA is technically run by the state, not by the city. It's not a city agency. They don't have a vaccine mandate. So they may be the only workers in New York City who do not have to be vaccinated. Now, what I've noticed is that depending on kind of the size of your employer, they'll accept religious exemptions or medical exemptions. If you have like a medium size or a small size employer and you write a good religious exemption, they seem to accept them. Or like if they don't and you kind of like put some pressure on them, they kind of work with you.
Mhm.
Now, if you work for one of these larger bureaucracies or like in New York, the nurses have the mandate, right? And that actually comes from the state. And then the city workers were come for next. And so these are huge, large bureaucracies, right? There's 130,000 employees of the New York City Department of Education. And you're not talking to a person. You send your stuff into the Department of Human Capital. How is that for a term, right?
Oof.
You check mark some boxes. in specifically for the teachers, each agency I think was slightly different because they do negotiate it with our union, which every single union hung us out to dry, right? So for all you union people out there, and I've never been super union because I'm like, I just don't think the unions are like really as democratic as they claim to be, like for the people. It's not that I'm anti-union, it's like I'm anti what these unions have become. And I think that this situation perfectly exemplifies what they are. They are political arms of the Democratic Party, typically
Right.
political pawns. And it's not about their membership. Like, yeah, they want to try to maintain their membership and save some face by like making sure that we get our 3020A hearings, which they just want to make sure that we have those hearings, that they can't fire us without those hearings, but they don't care that we're going to get fired even through those hearings. Like they're not going to put up a defense for us. They just want to make sure that the DOE can't just fire us without, because in the case like some teacher hits a student or molests a student, of course, they want them to have their due process rights. They protect those teachers.
Mm-hmm.
It's
optics.
Right. You go after somebody else's bodily autonomy. That's what it's all about. But you want to protect your own.
Jeez. So, you had a legal battle, correct?
Yes, so that's correct. We've mounted several lawsuits against New York City. The first one was Maniscalco versus, it's like either the city of New York or the mayor, but people in New York City, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that one, they submitted a writ certiorari, I believe that's how you say it, to the Supreme Court. We had gone in and out, back and forth for a while. And then that one was just kind of like a general class action for a bunch of different classes of people, from the medical to the religious to the like a specific medical classification of like being pregnant or breastfeeding. So it was kind of more general. And then the lawsuit that we have going on right now, which I'm still hopeful about, is a religious case. So it's on the basis of religious freedom. And so everybody who's involved in that is people who file for religious exemptions, right? So there's some people who, like Rachel Maniscalco, who was the named plaintiff in that first case, she just did it for philosophical reasons, which aren't considered religious. So she didn't file religious exemption. So like she wouldn't qualify for this. And anybody with some sort of medical reason wouldn't qualify for this. So it's only people who file the religious exemptions. And we've been going back and forth between the lower courts and the Second Circuit Court, and the lower courts and the Second Circuit Court. We appealed to the Supreme Court, got denied one time, lower courts, Second Circuit, lower courts, Second Circuit, appealed again to the Supreme Court, got denied, went back to the Supreme Court and said, hey, Sotomayor didn't even write a thing. Like, can another panel look at it? Another panel looked at it, denied. And so now I believe we have a case coming up. I don't know the exact date, again, in one of the lower courts. So, and then I think that I think they are gonna do a full writ certiorari. I don't know if I'm saying that exactly correctly. Some Latin word to apply to go to the Supreme Court, because the other applications were just like for them to look at one specific aspect of the case on an emergency basis, not a full like look at the whole case. So I do think that that's going to be the ultimate point.
So at that point, it would go back to the Supreme Court for them to look at the entire case. And right now they're just kind of looking at little bits and pieces and kind of saying, no, screw you, screw you, screw you.
Kind of, yeah. And the city courts, they're like so corrupt. It just seems like the judges there's been a couple judges, so I'm like, all right, they're asking questions. Like that one judge seems like they're just like kind of like, remember how Sotomayor was like 100,000 kids have been something ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of how these judges are. They're just like, they seem so COVIDians, and I'm sure they're looking out for the city. I'm sure they're looking out for the city. And I think that they're just trying to buy time, because they did actually initially find way back in like November. One of the first times they admitted, the New York City Department of Education admitted that their policy was discriminatory, because they asked for teachers to submit a letter from a clergy. And that's a clear violation of the law. on several levels, at the state level and at the federal level,
Mhm.
and on the city level, because we have the city, the human rights, our own like human rights set of policy that includes a statute on this. So they were like, yeah, I guess we shouldn't have done that. And so they actually put out another set of guidelines for applying that didn't have that requirement in it. But the thing is that a lot of people didn't apply in the first place. So they're like, I don't have a clergy. What's the point? So, but they didn't have the chance to reapply. And they're playing like games like that. Another game that they played was that they didn't allow us to certify it as class action. They were like, no, this case can go through, and then you can like once the case is finished, then you can certify it as class action, which just seems like, like, because it's not 15 people. And I feel like the judges need to really realize that it's like hundreds, if not like 1,000 people. Like, it's not a small group. And and unfortunately, some people have complied. Some people got a shot or 2 shots. I know some people who just got 1 shot, and they're kind of like trying to slide by in there, but they've started picking those guys off too.
It's so crazy to me to think that people just are saying like, hey, I don't want to take this medical treatment. They have legitimate concerns about it, and I'm sure there's people who have legitimate religious, reasons for not wanting it, but you're being told that you can't do that. And even under medical exemptions, like, you would think of all things, you would say like a medical exemption, like, we shouldn't fuck around with that, because what if this legitimately hurts this person and we just told them they have no other choice but to get this? So I know in a perfect libertarian society, yes, this whatever business could discriminate against whoever they want, but like, it's a little different when you have the government literally saying that you have to mandate this. Okay, now we should be able to depart from Ancapistan and say that this is bad, and whatever we can do to stop
Right.
this
Well,
is okay.
but anarcho-capitalism, it would be, there wouldn't be a government, right? Wouldn't it be like business by business? Like,
Right.
there wouldn't be a central authority to like mandate it.
Yeah. So that's my point, though. And, in a theoretical anarchist, Jesus, my dog's such an asshole.
It's okay.
In a theoretical anarcho-capitalist utopia. Okay, there we go. That was the phrase I'm looking for. Like you said, it'd be business by business by business, right? So the business would be able to mandate the vaccine, and then you'd be able to go work for somewhere else. But once again, we're talking about the president pushing for a federal vaccine mandate on private employers. This is different. This
Right.
is the federal government trampling on businesses' rights, which then trample on individual rights. All right.
Right.
So whatever
And
we
that's
can do to
always
stop
how it's
that.
been, though. That's
Yes.
always how it's been, right?
Right.
So originally, sometimes some of these ideas do kind of come from the people and then like trickle their way up, and then the government's like, oh, we should do that. They latch on to
Right.
that power, and then they're the ones who are kind of trying to maintain this status quo past its time of economic, like it being economically feasible.
Right.
So, because I know that the mandate put a lot of pressure on businesses, because now you have to pay somebody to stand there and check those cards, right? And now you have less people coming into restaurants, because there's this idea that like COVID's the scary thing and you need this passport for it. And B, like, anybody who's unvaccinated or like doesn't like the system is now not going out. So you're kind of coming at businesses from both ways. And I'm sure there are businesses out there that are catered to like those people who want an vaccinated only area. And, we have public accommodations laws. And in an ideal anarcho-capitalist, now I'm having trouble with it.
Oh, you're good.
And I do have to say, interjecting, I definitely do not think that my son is an asshole. I would never draw that comparison between dogs and children. So in a perfect anarcho-capitalism society, you wouldn't have public accommodations, right? And I don't know if I'm for or against that, because of everything that's happened recently. That was kind of our argument against the businesses. But again, the businesses were usually only doing it because the government told them they had to.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's kind of been my question all along, is that for a business, what are you willing to do to make sure that a business enforces this? What does that look like, being enforced with someone who does not want to comply with this? And that's a legitimate question. And I have not gotten quite a clear answer on that. So are
Well,
you willing to send in police to, at gunpoint and
yes.
arrest people
Well, not
and
at
fine people
gunpoint,
if they
but
do that?
yes, they have in New York City.
Well,
They
okay,
have.
right. Well, at what point, if somebody says, I'm not going to enforce this vaccine mandate, then you fine them and they refuse to pay the fine.
Yeah. Well,
Then
like
what?
Ian Smith, right? Did you
He
see?
was on the show.
Right. Yeah. Ian Smith's fitness. So, and I think he beat most of his stuff, right?
He's still kind of battling out in
Okay. He's
court.
battling. And then
Yeah.
Danny Presti out in Staten Island.
Okay. I'm not
So yeah,
familiar with him.
maybe you should. Yeah. He also did not comply. And I believe he beat all his stuff.
Hmm.
And like he got arrested on a couple other occasions too for like blocking a garbage truck when we were like holding the line on the mandates. Um, but yeah, people were getting arrested in New York City, but like the only thing that went for us was that they have the catch and release. Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's no bonds. It's just promise to appears or whatever.
Yeah.
And so like you go and then like after a couple hours, like you get released.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the charges got dropped, some of them stuck. I think that they're working on like getting a lawyer and stuff and um working on these kind of like civil rights sort of base cases.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. Hopefully something, excuse me, comes of that. I was always very frustrated because I'm like, where are the lawyers? Like, where are the people who want to where's the Benjamin Crumps of our side? Except hopefully like with a little more integrity.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like there's probably a lot of money to be made if you're a lawyer that's willing to kind of stick it to the man, although typically the lawyer is the man. The
Yeah.
lawyers who are looking out there to fight the vaccine mandates, I'm sure you could find people who would pay you hand over fist.
Right. And we need some of these big organizations to support us though. Cause like, like we've raised a lot of money and we paid these lawyers a lot of money. But also
Mm-hmm.
like I don't have a job. Like I was delivering Uber today. That's why I was like, I have my son with me because I was like, it's a good time to do Uber right now. So we're gonna drive around. And because like I'm about to run out of unemployment. So I'm like trying to like string together. I have like some projects and stuff that I do, but it's like not enough. So I'm like, all right, today was the first day I ever did it. So I wanted to see like, okay, if I like put in like really do it, like how much money could I make? And so I made like $100 today. But
Yeah.
it's like I had to do it for like 5 hours. And it's like you drive around a lot and it's kind of tiring.
Mm-hmm. My
So,
God.
but it's like if you have to make some money real quick, I guess. But at the same time, it's like, if I made $100 a day, that's only $2,800 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's not enough.
Right. And you were a tenured teacher. So, real quick, kind of define what a tenured teacher is and what that kind of lifestyle looks like.
So, I mean, tenure is actually something that I don't even super really believe in.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I was like, okay, it's part of the system and it's something you kind of put into your calculation for how things are going to go. And it creates kind of like a comfort level for you,
Mhm.
right? Because you're like, all right, I'm going to work this many years. And after 25 years, then I'm kind of like guaranteed this amount in my retirement. Plus, I have my 403B account, which is like a 401k, except for
Mhm.
public employees. And then I'm going to like do my investing on my own because I'm making like my check was like 4K a month, because I made like 75K a year plus I had a bunch of overtime opportunities. So I was making like almost another extra 10K from that. And so like I'm a single mom and like I do get child support and all that. But I felt like I was doing pretty good for myself. Like I
Mhm.
saved money every month. I was investing. I was like putting away the max amount in my Roth IRA and also had like a regular investing account. And, I felt comfortable like going to the store and like buying whatever I want. Like not that like I always was brought up to like make a shopping list and like
Mhm.
buy things on sale like that. So I wasn't like super crazy, but like I bought organic food and I like I didn't have to worry about it.
Right.
But now I'm like really like, all right, you can go get like bars and we'll get like, like some chicken, I guess, and a couple bucks, it's like way different. And it's nerve wracking too when you're like living on your credit cards or like
Yeah.
on unemployment, your unemployment's going to run out in a couple of weeks. And sometimes you're like, you feel the stress of it, you know?
My God. Yeah. And I mean, you've taken a huge hit in your standard of living to take a stand. And I think that's something that people should really admire. I've
But at
had,
the same time,
yeah.
I'm so grateful because I like look around. I'm like, bro, like I don't have a job. Like I haven't worked in like 8 months. And, you know, I'm sitting on a couch in a well heated house in the winter. Like,
Mhm.
you know, so it's like not like, you know, I haven't had it super hard like that. And I put myself in the position where I could hold the line. Like I had savings. So I could do this. You know, I am definitely like going on to my credit card and stuff. Um, but I also like have a bunch of investments, but I don't want to liquidate those either. Cause I do know, like, I've listened to a bunch of investors and they'll say, like, one thing that they almost wish that they did was like go in debt to invest more. So I'm like, all right, I'm investing my money. Like, I'm going to make it through this. I'm working through some things right now, but I have a vision for creating my own school or educational services. You know, I'm going hard into the YouTube and the content creation, and I
Mhm.
believe in this, and this is what I'm going to do. And right now, I'm digging a little hole in terms of my finances, but I believe in this and it's going to work out.
Right. Well, I think we were all told when we were younger that most businesses generally don't make any money after the first five or until the first 5 years are over. So yeah, there is, as I always say, it's all reps, right? I'm a big exercise enthusiast. So it's, there's a lot of work to be put in to put on that little bit of lean
Right.
mass, or you got to make a lot of deposits into the bank before you finally start to see a return on your investment.
Right. Well, listen, I was talking into my phone for how long?
Hmm.
And then suddenly what I was talking about was really relevant to a group of people who didn't have a lot of places to get it.
Hmm.
So that's when I really got a lot of followers. I had been talking to my phone for 2 years. And
Right. Right.
then, and I had like 1,700 or 1,800 followers. And then when the mandate stuff got really serious, like, you know, that's what I would talk about into my phone then instead of my lesson of the day or whatever I was talking about. And people were looking for that. People were looking for people who were talking about that for support, for information. And so I just like got a really large influx of followers. And like I was like growing pretty steadily the last like 2-3 months. I've been having a little bit like harder time having the same growth.
Hmm.
Every once in a while I'll get like a nice little pop of like 100 or 200 people, but then it's like slow going and I'll like go up and then I'll like
Yeah.
go down like 3 or 4. And I'm like, okay.
It's kind of a little bit of a rocky ride. So that kind of being said, well, actually, I want to kind of tag on this real quick. I'm part of the Pennsylvania Libertarian Party Mises Caucus, and I was on our podcast on Sunday, and they were kind of asking everybody, what do we think is important going into 2023 and 20, the rest of 2022?
Right.
And it's about taking a stand at the right time, right? So we could all say racism and slavery is bad, after however many 100 years we are past it, right? But where are you when it's time to take a stand on the most important thing right now?
Right
So
now.
exactly. So you need to be present in the moment to take a stand about what's important right now. You were right there when the vaccine mandates were big, and you took a stand right then when it wasn't
And
popular.
before that, listen, I did it before
Yeah.
that. I want to say that what I might even be more proud of is the schools,
Hmm.
right? Because I came out as soon as they closed down the schools, I said this isn't right. And I went out in the streets and I was standing right next to the parents and I was saying, open these schools back up.
Hmm.
And so like to me, it's like I always thought, you know, if I was back then, how would I have been? If I was in the time of slavery and the time of this, like, would have I been a person that stood up for it? Everybody thinks that they would have been.
Hmm.
And then it came to this. And where is everybody? You can point
Right.
to, oh, the government was bad back then. People were bad back then. But now you have so much hubris to think that those things can't happen now.
Hmm. Plenty of people do. And like I was saying, it's you have to take a stand when it's not popular to do so. That's when you could tell somebody's character is actually there. And obviously with the whole war in Ukraine kind of going on now, it's important to be anti-war when it's so easy to be a neocon and say that we should go, dominate the world as we try to do in this country. So that being said, is there anything you're optimistic about going into the rest of this year?
Oh, yes, I'm optimistic.
Okay.
I mean, you have to be optimistic, right?
Yeah,
I feel like
absolutely.
if I mean, not that I'm like optimistic 100% of the time. Like I have
Mhm.
my days and my times where I'm like things suck and I like cry and whatever. But my overall trend is definitely towards optimism.
Mhm.
I think that where there is a lot of instability and turmoil and confusion, there's opportunity, not like in a political opportunistic way, but in a way that like there's something falling. Like there's some sort of like regime, there's a change happening here. And so we can either allow the forces that have been dominating to continue to dominate, or we can take this opportunity to seize control of these new, what you call them, um, technologies
Mhm.
and um, who owns the resources of making things? You know what I'm talking about?
Well, I think what you're getting at is basically taking advantage of all the technologies and resources available to us to help spread the message and wake more people
Of
up.
liberty, right? And of
Yeah.
freedom. Like we have an opportunity. I think like I see like we're also like I think moving into an era of decentralization,
Yes.
right? Because and you have to go back and forth. Like history has to oscillate to make progress.
Hmm.
And so we've become centralized. We had to centralize in order to make certain advancements in technology. And now we have this like really great thing, the internet, and we're like kind of in our teenage years. But as we kind of like more mature with it, I really think there's going to be an opportunity to take smaller groups of people to create the same economies of scale that you once needed like these large conglomerates to make. And I also think that it makes more sense for the long-term stability of society, right? Because it's so hard to sustain in these such large like social groups and cultural groups in when you want to talk about like self-care and things like real self-care is like you have to be invested in your community, and
Hmm.
things just got way too centralized, way too federalized. And that was actually one of my things going way back to when I like really didn't know anything. I always said I want more state rights. I want more state rights. I want more like I want to be more involved locally. I want to feel like I can change things.
Right. Yeah, because right now it doesn't. We don't think we have a say, but the thing is, if we all got a little bit more invested locally and elected more people that we know, leaders of our
Yes.
community locally, then we would see a great change.
Right.
And that's what not a lot of people are doing, but I think that's kind of coming through more and more and more, especially
Right.
as we saw so many differences in outcomes with states. Well, I shouldn't necessarily say differences of outcomes, but like, you see a lot of people are moving to red states that didn't lock down and moving
Florida
out of.
and Texas.
Right, right. So I think people kind of learned the hard way that okay, maybe it is important who's elected governor, who's elected city councilor, this or
It's
that.
activated a lot of people for sure.
Right.
I actually got a letter the today
Mhm.
from my condo association being like, because we didn't have a quorum at the last meeting, we couldn't do the budget. I'm like, I need to put up or shut up. Like, I'm not even participating in my like where I live. So I'm gonna go to that next one and hopefully we'll have a quorum.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As I got involved with the Libertarian Party, it's like, man, there's like so much intricacy and rules, and people get really invested in this stuff. But I mean, it's meaningful, and you're making meaningful change within your community. Um, we've been going for about an hour now. I want to be respectful of your time. All my dogs are going absolutely crazy, except for my mini pin. She's literally sleeping down at my feet right now. Anything else you want to add on? And anything you want to plug?
Um, I would love to know more, I guess, about the Libertarian Party. I'm definitely a big fan of Dave Smith, and I know he's a big Libertarian Party guy, and he's been saying that there's like big changes coming, and he's in the Mises
There is.
caucus, if I'm
Yes.
right, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I would just definitely be more interested in learning about what's going on with that. So maybe you could come on my podcast and talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I just appreciate you having me on and sharing my story and the story of kind of what's going on in New York City, because just I'm so insulated here about what's going on in New York City and Connecticut. It's like hard to when I talk to people in other states are like COVID. Like the only time I talk about that is with you. You know what I mean? Or then
Yeah.
there's people out in California and Portland who are also going through similar things, sometimes more strict, sometimes less, but it's hard to keep track of all the cases
Right.
and all the things. So I hope that this gives people a little update about what's going on in New York City. And if you want daily updates, you can follow me on Instagram at Teaching Liberty. I'm also on Twitter, which is where I know you from.
Mhm.
I don't post quite as much on Twitter, but you can find me over there, Teach Liberty One. And you can find everything on my website and join the community that I have over there at teachingliberty.org.
Awesome. You need to look into Larry Sharp. He is one of the greatest libertarians to have ever lived, and he's running
Yes.
for, yes, he's running for governor in New York. I had him on the
Yes.
show, and he is just absolutely one of my favorite people on the face of the planet, just because he's such a sincerely nice guy who cares about people and cares about solutions rather than theoretical abstracts or other stuff. He's just, I've said it many, many times, but he's probably one of the greatest libertarians alive. And I'm so honored that I not only got to talk to him on the show, but also support him in his run for governor, because I did donate to him and I will donate again just because I think he's such an awesome guy.
All right. Yes, I'll have to bring him up more too. I guess like I pay more attention. I'm guilty of it to
Mhm.
the corporate mainstream candidates.
Yeah.
So it's like Astorino and Zeldin are kind of like the mainstream Republican candidates. And then of course Kathy Hochul, now Cuomo, talking about he wants to run, but whatever, I don't care, run. Like um, but yeah, I do forget about Larry Sharp, who I've been following for a long time on Instagram. And also, I think he's conservative party. There's a guy named Derek Gibson, and he's really cool too. He was out on the streets protesting with us. He did a few sit-ins with us.
Okay,
So
that's awesome. Nice. All right. Well, any last closing thoughts? Anything else to plug, or you good to go?
oh man, I appreciate you for having me on, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Until next time, take care.